Well, awesome. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday in November, a couple weeks before Turkey Day. I just came from a meeting up at the Capitol with a number of turkeys that are dying. So get your turkey while they last before they all die of avian flu or we hunt them down so they don't spread it. Um, the one thing is tofu never spreads the flu. So there you go. Those of you who don't know me, I am Chris Merritt. I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer for Utah. I will be doing sort of the first part of the presentation today and then be handing it over to Savannah Argardi, our compliance archaeologist, and Deb Miller, who is our records manager for the SHPO. It's really great to see a lot of familiar names and faces, also a bunch of new folks that I don't know, but I'm excited that you've been willing to spend a couple hours with us this morning. We're going to try to keep up a good pace and try to hit before the timeline would end, before this meeting would end, but I just really appreciate everybody taking the time. Savannah came up with this idea to kind of get a refresher course out there, and I'm seeing a lot of long-term practitioners of the Section 106 or 404 process. A lot of this will probably be somewhat routine, especially the stuff I'm going to be going through this morning. But Savannah just really wanted, with the number of new people that have started in the state, plus it's been a few years since we've offered a training, just to get everybody together, talk through not just the 106 and 404 training, but more generally archaeological submission processes, just because we do have a lot of new people to the state. Savannah, also kudos to her. She shepherded the last revision of the SHPO guidance that went out a couple weeks ago. So if you haven't seen that, we'll make sure to share that link after the meeting as well as part of the meeting recording and notes. But we're just trying to keep everybody on the same page. I was up at the Capitol this morning with the Natural Resources Coordinating Committee, and it was really all the different DNR agencies, state and federal agencies that deal with natural resources, but it was a fairly common theme that there's a lot of work across everybody's jurisdiction and a lot of turnover in staff, really hard to hire people. So we want to make this as painless as possible as we move through the next few years of all the implementation of, the continued implementation of the Great American Outdoors Act, the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, all these big federal acts, plus the legislature pumping lots of money into transportation and fiber optic and new construction. So we understand all of you are busy. We understand all of you are overworked. And so hopefully this training can make sure that as we're participating in these processes, that we're giving you what you need, but you also understand the expectations of our office and the general input of the laws. So I just appreciate, 63 people on this call. This is one of the bigger trainings we've had in a while. So that's awesome. You're going to hear me for the first hour this morning as I go through the overview of Section 106 and Utah Code Annotated 98404. It's good for even the federal agencies to know about the state law, and it's really good for the state practitioners to know about the federal law, because you guys are going to see a lot of overlapping projects, I think, as these things get implemented. So I'm looking at Savannah, who's the MC. Should I just start right into it, or do you have any other housekeeping activities?
At the beginning of your presentation, there's a little agenda. So yeah, just go ahead and start sharing. And we can go over the agenda before you actually start the presentation.
Awesome. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can see it.
Awesome. Always good to check before you start wandering through conversation for a while. So as Savannah mentioned, we do have an agenda today. So I'm cruising through because, as Savannah well knows, I go longer than my hours slot for these trainings. So I'm shortening our welcome by a few minutes and jumping right into the second agenda, which is the overall training of 106 and 404. We'll take a break wherever I'm done, but hopefully in the 11:15 target range, and then move into the second half of the extravaganza, which will be led by Savannah, talking about archaeological compliance submission requirements. of which, overall has been pretty solid the last few years, but there's always good ways to tighten up so you don't get emails back from us when you're getting managers breathing down your neck. So just a good way to overview that. And then we'll pitch it to Deb Miller, our records manager, to talk about more of the nuts and bolts tabular data, and then also Sego, which is our virtual online platform for viewing cultural resource data that's protected. And then UDAM, which is our collections up at the Marriott, where all the scanned files remain. So this is going to be a little bit heavier on the archaeological side of the discussion of compliance. The historic buildings does have a lot of work as well, that has a lot of data requirements. And we do have a few folks, I think, on the phone that if there are some data questions about historic building consultations, I think Chris Hansen's on the phone. So without any further ado, I'll just launch into it. I don't see anybody panicking, so I think we're good to go. As I mentioned, I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer. Then we have Savannah, who is our sole archaeological reviewer. So all cases that come through the door that have an archaeological component are reviewed by Savannah. We do have Chris Hansen on the call this morning as well. He's our sole architectural reviewer and also our deputy SHPO. We've consolidated his duties to be all architectural reviews. So every time you do deal with something that's standing architecture, he's going to be reviewing it. If it's a mixed resource consultation, which we're seeing kind of an increase in those as we move forward, Savannah and Chris Hansen will be tag teaming the reviews and ensuring that the data is processed appropriately. And then, of course, we have the illustrious Deb Miller, who is our records manager, and she'll be dealing with more of the detail stuff. Now in Utah, and this might be news to some of you, is that we have two dual processes when it comes to cultural resource compliance. We have a federal process and we have a state process. We are one of 33 states that have a state law equivalent or ish to the federal law. Now, at this point, all of you should probably know by its heart, Section 106 refers to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This was passed in 1966 to require federal agencies to take into account their actions on historic properties. So if you're in Utah and you're dealing with federal funds, lands, permits, or approvals, you're dealing with the federal process. Even if you're a state agency and you're receiving federal funds or you're working on federal lands, you have to follow the federal law. That trumps state law. Then secondarily, we have state funds, lands, permits, and approvals. That falls under Utah Code Annotated 9-8-404. Not quite as catchy as Section 106, but it is a state law where Section 106 is both a several hundred page act plus then 13 or 14 single space pages of code. The state law is basically a page, a couple paragraphs worth of content. The photo on the bottom left is a homestead down in Alpine that we were contacted about last year because the state was giving a potential grant to Alpine City to do improvements in a historic park there. And so they had to actually work with our office to process what is the proposed action to this historical homestead, and that fell under state law. So even the city had to follow that law, but because of that, state fund, land, and permit. And so that's where those two hooks exist. Overall, the principles to remember, whether you're doing Section 106 or the state process, is it's a planning tool. Both of these laws are before the action. There is no retroactive component of either law. And so you should be using it early on in your planning processes. Now I'm looking at our friends at UDOT and I'm looking at our friends at the Forest Service, ensuring that cultural resources are at the very beginning of the planning process is critical before decisions are made, doors are shut, and windows are the only exit. The other really important principle, historical values are public values. Thus, public input is paramount. Now, under state law, there's not a huge component of public input, but under federal law, there is a large component that is public input. And it is a recognition that public funds or public lands are being affected. Therefore, the public has a say in how those actions occur. That compliance does not mandate preservation. Our office gets two types of phone calls. One that says, I want it listed on the National Register so no one can ever tear it down. And then the other one is like, oh, it's listed on the National Register, I can never tear it down. Neither of those are accurate. Preservation is not a mandate, it is a process when it comes to the eyes of these laws. And hopefully, if we do our job right, the effects will be minimal. All decisions in the process are reached through consultation. Consultation with our office, Native American tribes, other consulting parties, other state or federal agencies that are partnering on projects, but it's all done through a consultation process because there's no brilliant one person, there's only brilliant multiple people. And then finally, at the end of the day, and I like to always say this, you make the final decision if you work for the agency, not your consultant, not the proponent, not the SHPO. The agency is responsible for all decisions. If something goes south, our office will not be litigated. You will be litigated as the agency. So that's why our office is here to assist you to make sure that those decisions are well documented and you followed the process pretty well. The implementing regulations, so you have an act, and then to implement an act, you have regulation. And so in the federal law, it's what we call 36 CFR 800. It's a wonderful little document that you can get online, and I keep a copy on my desk at all times because that does lay out the ground rules for how to implement the act itself. That is the play-by-play of the process. The Advisory Council does have a nice little online guide on how to use those regulations and also keeps it on their website. And then on the state side, the act and the regulation is the same. So still that 9-8-404. I include the links for both of these. If you can't find either of these references, please feel free to reach out to myself or Savannah or Chris Hansen, and we can help you locate that. So going back to 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act mandated one critical thing, and you know how much everybody loves a huge block quote, but it is a recognition of the importance of this underlined section, that the whole Section 106 process is predicated on the agency, in this case, the federal, taking into account the effect of the undertaking on any district, site, building, structure, or object that is included in or eligible for inclusion in the National Register. Now, when it first passed, it was required that you had to be on the National Register. But very quickly, the federal agencies realized how long that would take, and it would create a real logjam of the process. So the Nixon administration allowed those being eligible for the National Register to also be included. So those of you that do like, oh, I looked at the Wikipedia page for National Register listings and there's nothing in my area, that's not the only data source because we also have those that are eligible for. And in the same National Historic Preservation Act, the SHPO was set up as the center repository for holding archaeological and historic building records. So we should be the corporate data center for everybody. And so we've worked very hard. Deb has worked very hard. Our Leaf Lang, the records manager before Deb, worked very hard to ensure that our records are as up to date and complete as possible. But of course, there is always holes. We're dealing with some archaeological site forms that date to the 1920s. There's going to be problems. But the point here is that this is the account of the effect before an action. Now, in the 106 process, so this is the federal process, the consulting parties are the federal agencies themselves, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is a federal entity that does not tie to any department. And so its main job is to ensure implementation of Section 106 is equitable across the entire country because each 50 states has its own SHPO and then the territories and then the TIPOs. So the Advisory Council is here to really make sure that we stay on track as a whole. And they have some other provisions in the law as we'll talk about. Under federal law too, we have both the consulting parties, of which the SHPO is a consulting party, and then of course, public input. Under state law, and you'll see this little tag a few places during the presentation, there is no input from really consulting parties under state law because there doesn't have that same provision in 9-8-404. So it's not fully transparent from a public eye in state law, but it is still hopefully being posted some way through a state agency to get public input through other messages. Our role. The State Historic Preservation Office, which I found Our office started in December 1969. That is when our office received its first federal grant to implement the Architectural and Archaeological Survey of the state of Utah. So 3 years after the passage of the Historic Preservation Act, our office was created. The NHPA recognized that each state needs to have its own sort of unique office to help facilitate local interest, the state's interest, and the public's interest with these naughty little federal agencies. Just to have a voice and have a coordinating aspect. Our job is to advise and assist federal agencies. My job is not to beat federal agencies. My job is not to block projects. It is to mainly assist our agencies and help them get through the process, balancing the needs of the agency with cultural resources. We do sometimes work with those offices or agencies that have delegated authority. So in this case, that's the Federal Communications Commission, a federal agency, has divested its authority to local companies to do consultations under Section 106 themselves. So we assist them. We do agreements with agencies and even FCC proponents. Those are helped to assist the process move quickly. If there's multiple states involved, we will designate a lead SHPO. If there's a TIPO and a SHPO and it's a cross-jurisdictional project, sometimes we delegate authority there too. Sometimes we'll split the responsibility. And this is the one thing that most people don't understand. We consult on all undertakings. Even if your action is streamlined under a programmatic agreement, you are still consulting with us on that action. You have to meet the requirements of that programmatic agreement, but you are still consulting, even if we've signed an agreement to let you move things quickly through the queue. Now, the jarring white here, this is an oldie and goodie from the Advisory Council. This is how the Section 106 process works, but you can use it in the same way as the 98404 process. So it's the same basic procedure, 4 steps, and I'm going to walk you through each of the 4 steps here pretty quickly in the next 40 minutes. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to push that little raise handy button, and I'll take a point of stopping and asking you to ask your question. So let's start at the beginning. The initiation, step 1. Do you have an undertaking? That is going to be defined in the next slide, but it goes back to that dual obligations. They're federal lands, permits, money, approval, or state lands, money, or approvals. Coordinating with other reviews. Like if there's a NEPA process, a National Environmental Policy Act process, are you coordinating with that? If there's other SMACRAs and other environmental reviews, are you in concert? The one thing I've noticed in my 10 years at the SHPO is if one process is ahead of the other process, bad things can usually happen because then one party looks like the other party is dragging their feet. So making sure that we coordinate reviews is a holistic approach. Also in this step 1, you should be identifying your consulting parties. Where's your undertaking? What kind of resources is it affecting? That will vary who you reach out to as official consulting parties. And then, of course, a plan to involve the public. Both the federal and state agencies, you probably have policies in place of where you put public notices, how long you do that. Do you have scoping meetings that are in person or virtual? All of those things are needed to be handled in this step 1 component. Now, you love more text. But is it an undertaking? That first part of step 1. There's the definition, comes right out of 36 CFR 800. And if you look at the bottom left of these slides, there's kind of a tracker of where this language is coming from. So if you go to the regulations, section 800, part 3, you can find where I'm quoting this. But in federal law, the definition of an undertaking is project, activity, or program funded in whole or in part under the direct or indirect jurisdiction of a federal agency, yada, yada, yada. Those requiring a federal permit, license, or approval. And those are subject to state or local registrations administered pursuant to a delegation of or approval by a federal agency. That's a mouthful. But basically, if you're the Park Service and you're issuing a film permit, that's both land and permit. If I see my friends with the USDA Rural Development on here, if you're federally loaning someone a house or a home loan to build or construct, that's an undertaking. There's public funds. All of these things connect. The Army Corps of Engineers, that's a permit, even though a lot of their work is on private land. So the undertaking definition is intentionally broad because all of those things have a public say. it is intentionally broad because when they created the federal regulation, there was a smart recognition that they're not going to be able to capture every weird thing that the federal government is going to be doing. And so it was intentionally broad to allow flexibility in the future. And it is not purely on funding. That is one comment we get a lot from folks. It's like, well, we're not taking any federal funds, we're just getting a permit. Like, that's not how an undertaking is defined. Both are included. And then that third bullet point, we run into a lot. A state-funded project, but does require an Army Corps permit, is now a federal project. Maybe with additional state components, but it's now falling under federal law. The difference between federal and state laws are fairly substantial when it comes to Native American consultation, timelines, consulting parties. So it's always good to know at the onset where those connections are. Now, on the flip side, what's the definition of an undertaking under state law? We clarified this a little bit about 6 years ago, just to be a little firmer. But basically, before expending any state funds or approving any undertaking, each agency shall. So state funds or approval. And this does include state lands, would be included in the larger definition of an undertaking through the definitions part of state code. So it's, again, funds, approval, or land fall into that category. So at the end of step one, if there's no undertaking, then you're done. The one thing I kind of glossed over is there a potential to cause effect with your undertaking? Under federal law and a lot of state law, does your project have the potential to cause effect to a physical thing? And think about it in this terms. If Manti is using a state grant to buy a new fire truck, it's a state undertaking, right? There's state money. But is there a potential to cause effect to historic properties? Probably not. If anything, it might be beneficial because they're going to have a nice new fire engine to put out fires in all these old buildings. Secondarily, the federal government. You guys buy paper and pens and new equipment constantly, but it doesn't have a potential to cause effects. So we try to limit those, and so you can end at step one. You still reviewed it. There's usually some sort of letter to file or some sort of note in the file that you reviewed it and that there is no undertaking, or it does not have a potential to cause effect. That has to be documented even at the end of step one, because if a party challenges you as a federal agency that it did have a potential to cause effect, you need justification. Usually no potential to cause effect, we don't review even. That's an agency's call, but we've tried to define a lot of those with our agency partners through agreement documents. Now, if it is an undertaking, state money, federal money, approvals, permits, yada, yada, and it could cause an effect, now we go to step two. So this is a basic, you can exit at all four levels of the Section 106 or 404 process. So step one, you can be done because there's no undertaking or there's no potential to cause effects. But if you do have an undertaking, you go to step two. Step two is codified as identifying historic properties. Now, historic properties have a very specific term, and it goes back to that 106 language I had a couple slides ago, and we'll talk about in a minute. It's not just every old thing. It's got a clear legal definition. But in this step two, what are the scope of the efforts that you need to undertake? There's a lot of difference between a quarry expansion and a 300-mile transmission line construction. The scope of efforts is going to be variable by the undertaking itself. And that will define then how do you identify historic properties. That's going to be whether it's field surveys or background research. It's going to really define all of those different aspects. Once you've inventoried or reviewed, then you're evaluating for historic significance, and you're looking for those things that are National Register eligible or listed. I just want to plug right here is the archaeological data that we hold is protected under both state and federal law. So you have to be a permitted archaeologist in order to access that information. But our historic buildings and most of our National Register files are public. So we have a really fancy new online viewer for the hub.utah.gov. You can search our building collections online. So if you are more urban-based, that's a good resource for you. Don't go to Wikipedia to see what's listed in a community, because that's not how the law is written, is purely listings. As I mentioned, there is a legal definition of what is a historic property, and it's both in state and federal law now, so we could be in lockstep. And it means prehistoric or historic district, site, building, structure, or object included in or eligible for inclusion in the National Register. Now, this is very specific. And in Utah right now, about 60% of everything documented, so the 105,000 known archaeological sites and the 130,000 known historic buildings, are about 60% not eligible and 40% eligible, which means that when you're in a federal agency component, you need to look at those eligible resources when you're project planning. So it's really good to know what is and is not eligible. You also have to not just take it at face value. And when we talk about submission standards and everything, we use a rule of thumb of a 10-year survey. Just because 10 years ago, something from the 1960s might not have been called eligible or even documented, but now we recognize that it has significance. Now, that seems weird today, but if you were back in the 1980s doing archaeology, architectural history, you weren't even recording civilian conservation corps camps or World War II airfields because they weren't 50 years old yet. So it's always good to be reflective on our processes and just think about historic properties are fluid in the sense that our values in them can change over time. So when we start thinking about how do we identify those historic properties, we need to look at the scope of effort. Now, both in state and federal law, the agency can consult with us early on defining your area of potential effects, your APE. You should also be looking early at the existing information about historic properties. And that doesn't mean just our databases, old aerial photos, topographic maps, general land office plats, local history books. You should be looking at that information to determine in your area, are there things that we need to be concerned about? And then finally, this is the one thing we do very poorly, is seek information about parties likely to have knowledge or concerns. The locals, or the local historical society or the local municipality that live in that community. They might have information that would be very important for you to know as an agency before you start doing any project planning or even hiring a consultant in some cases, because you might be able to help fast forward their research. Now, their area of potential effect, or we call it the APE, I've heard it also called the APE, that is just the way that we try to put a boundary on your undertaking's impact. What are the areas your undertaking is going to have a physical or non-physical impact? It's a geographic area where we directly, so touch, or indirectly, we wave or spit. How are those effects going to impact historic properties? And it should be based on the size, scope, context, and visual intrusiveness of the project, and think in 3D. I include the graphic on the left because this is up at Fort Douglas on the University of Utah campus. And you can see the white sort of blocky structure in the middle. That is the foundation of the 1870s to 1880s guardhouse for Fort Douglas. And then you see the two flanking rectangles to the bottom left and bottom right, the ordnance and arsenal from 1862. It's on top, or those are underneath a very nicely manicured grass field up at Fort Douglas. And so it might not even be physically visible to you, but there are things underground. So that's why we think in 3 dimensions. We need to be thinking the height, the depth, the left, and the right, because that's going to help you identify the limit of what you need to do as an agency. Now, once you've done all that, then you move into identification efforts themselves. Most times in Utah, if it's archaeological, identification efforts are going to be walking around, what we call pedestrian survey. If it's within an urban environment, it might be more of a windshield survey, looking at historic structures, taking photos, and describing their eligibility. But we need to do that on the magnitude and scale of the undertaking. A road striping for UDOT, the identification efforts are probably pretty minimal because the effects are fairly minimal. But a 300-mile power line, how far do we need to look outside the staging areas or the build pads or the tensioning areas? How about the visual? How do we take into account the impact of a 200-foot lattice tower on visual resources? So all of that needs to be taken into account. Past studies can give you some indication. So before you even hit the ground, on the archaeological side, we require, and the agencies require, a literature review. What else has been done in that area? What did those reports say? Now, this is where I go off the training for a split second and just say that it's very frustrating at our office to see sort of rote literature reviews. Like, I don't need to see a bibliography. I need to see, did that influence your read of the situation at all? We had a situation about 10 years ago that an agency wanted to consult, saying, oh, it was all previously inventoried, and here's the bibliography. We pulled the first report, and it was a recon survey. So they covered 10,000 acres in one field day. But because the bibliography said it was surveyed, no, it's previously surveyed. So it's important to read these reports. It's important to understand their contents to help guide you going forward. And of course, the state computer wants to restart. You will not be doing that today. The next thing is also looking at applicable standards and guidelines. As much as we've tried to uniform cross-jurisdictional identification efforts, you still need to talk to SITLA and talk about their requirements. You still need to talk to the BLM and Forest Service about their requirements. And you need to look at our guidance for what's an archaeological site, what's transects with, all that stuff. Army Corps engineer have their own set of standards and guidelines. So you need to be looking at every applicable standard. And if you have struggles with that, please contact us. That's part of our role, is to be an intermediary with all the agencies, because that slide that said we consult on all undertakings gives us a contact with basically every agency. So it's good to know where you're working. And now that we have a second TIPO in Utah out in the basin with the Uinta Ore Ute tribe, need to be talking to them about their requirements when you enter their lands. And that's going to be different than ours potentially. And then, of course, there are confidentiality concerns. And I know there's people on this phone call that we've had conversations that it's frustrating that you can't see the archaeological data, but we are bound by law on who can and can't see those things. And so we can sometimes do a desktop review ourselves if you give us a phone call, but oftentimes we just say, get a consultant or bring in an archaeologist to help you with that process. As we walk around or we review material, we need to be thinking about, how do we assess the eligibility of these resources? Are they or are they not eligible for the National Register? Are they previously listed? If they've been previously surveyed, what was the eligibility call? Do you agree with that eligibility call? Do you think it should be modified both one way or the other way? We're open to conversations in that realm. It just needs to be applied, needs to be thoroughly thought out. Consensus determination of eligibility, meaning a consultant is in the field, perhaps working on the behalf of the federal agency, paid by the proponent. They document some things. They give it to the agency. They recommend, or they look at what the consultant recommended as eligibility. And then under law, because remember, agency are officially the decision makers, then the agency consults with us on the eligibility determination of those resources. And then we agree or we don't agree. And then we have a conversation. So that's where, some of the comments about, well, the field, consultants should be able to have complete carte blanche rule of what they can and can't record in the field. Like, that's not how this process works. We need to have consensus, and the agency is ultimately responsible for all those consultations and final determinations. And then finally, properties have to have integrity. There was a joke when I first started that there was a site out in the basin that someone wanted to make eligible. It's been completely removed from the landscape, so the history was floating in a cloud. It's like, it needs to have some aspects of integrity as defined by the National Register of Historic Places. Now, that is variable, and we need to include like traditional cultural properties, those places that might not have a lot of physical tangible elements for Native American or other religious or cultural interests that might have different aspects of integrity, but we need to have some integrity for that to be applicable. This is probably a little bit of a reminder. The eligibility is just trying to assess those that are worth recognition and preservation, or at least assessment in the eyes of the law. Generally, we use the 50-year guidance of saying if it's over 50 years old, it should be assessed. That's coming from years of tried and true processes, looking at ways of trying to assess things. Because again, 1980s, no one cared about World War II or CCC camps. If we would have stopped the clock in the 80s, we would have missed some really amazing resources. And then you find a thing. You're wandering around or you're driving down a road and you're taking photos. You need to assess, what's the eligibility. Is it eligible under A for association with events in history or patterns of events? Is it criteria B for significant people, C for architecture, construction, aesthetic qualities, work of a master, and then D for archaeology. And so when I teach courses, I always use the rule of thumb: A for association, B for big people, C for cool buildings, and D for data. For something to be eligible or listed on the National Register, you only need one of those. You don't need more than one. So it's a step-by-step process of, once you document a resource out in the field, does it meet one of these criteria? This one, some of you might recognize, is a wooden trestle installed in 1869. The vertical piles have been replaced in 1871, and this is on the Transcontinental Railroad. It's eligible under criteria A because it's associated with a fairly significant event in American history, the construction of the nation's first transcontinental railroad. It also probably could meet C for architectural style. It's a good example of that style of a trestle, and it retains a lot of integrity. B, this one's always my favorite for Chris Hansen. B is not as commonly used when we review eligibility, especially those archaeologists in the crowd. Most archaeological sites don't have an individual associated with them. As we move into the historic period, there could be, but it has to be associated of that person, and they made a significant impact to their lives while in that location. So this is the Lewis B. Ramsey House here in Salt Lake City. And it's a cool little architectural style, probably eligible under criteria C for its architecture, but it was listed for criteria B because Lewis Ramsey was a very famous Utah landscape artist. And it's not like just he stayed in this house for a while or he died in this house. Like, he had his studio in the back of the house, and that's where he did most of his arts that became his famousness, came from those art pieces. So it's related because his art studio was inside that building. This is criteria C, so that's the Casino Star Theater down in Gunnison. This is a very unique architectural style in Utah. We don't have a lot of these Beaux Art style historic facades. And so it's a great example of that style of architecture and that period of architecture. And if you haven't been to that site or gone and seen a show there, you totally should. It's an amazing resource and Gunnison's little crown jewel. And then finally, criteria D, D for data. So under criteria D, and I always joke that when they passed the Historic Preservation Act, it was really architecture focused, and then the archaeologists showed up waving their hands, and we slapped on some extra things to get our profession attached to these places. So D is, a site that can provide important information or has provided important information to history or prehistory. A lot of times these are, assessments are guided by research questions, integrity of the archaeological deposits, etc. But can we learn something about the past from these sites? And so this is an example of a trench up at the University of Utah for utility infrastructure improvement. And they ran it through several foundations of the original Camp Douglas period before it even became a fort. And that deposit right there in the upper left is where those artifacts on the bottom right came from, which are all Civil War era military artifacts: buttons, insignia, saber hooks. That's a nipple wrench from an old musket. All of these items, plus the personal items, would have provided us a lot of information about life at this post. So it was a criteria D significance, and it was an adverse effect because of the damage that had occurred there. But it has important information for us. So still within step 2, we've now wandered it, or we drove through it, or we did a literature review. Those are historic properties are eligible for, listed on. Non-historic properties are those that aren't. And then you can, again, end at step 2. If you didn't find anything at all, you can end at step 2. If you found nothing but non-historic properties or not eligible sites, and we agree, you can be done at step 2. And this is where most of our projects honestly end. About 60 to 70% of all of our projects end at step 2, just because the effects are minimal. And that's where we see finally a report or a letter being submitted, depends on if you had an inventory done or if it was just a desktop review. If you did find historic properties, something that's eligible for, then we move to step 3. So if there is no effect or there was no historic properties, you can end at step 2 and we're done. You can use the term this: no historic properties affected. So that means if you didn't have one, Or you found sites and none of them were eligible. Use that finding. That comes out of the regulations. You make that well documented in your letter and the report. Consulting parties under federal law are being notified, both under state and federal law. Our office has 30 days to review those reviews. Obviously, we do a lot better of this in the state, mostly on Savannah and Hanson's back right now, but we have 30 days to review, and not all of those reviews are going to be positive because that's how this process works. We're not rubber stamps. We're here to help you as an agency, but also look out for the resource. So that's why some of you have gotten probably letters back saying, we don't agree on this eligibility or your effect call. And that's not a reflection on you. That's just how the process works. And then if we agree on a no historic property is affected, you get a letter back from us where it comes under your agreement. Put that in your file, whether virtual or paper, and you can be done. And that's where we can end at step 2. No historic properties affected, concurrence, good, you move forward. Step 3. So this is where you found a historic property. Now we need to assess the impacts or effects of your undertaking on those resources. This has a little bit more in federal law because we are now touching a thing. We need to apply the criteria of adverse effect, and we need to figure out whether the action will have an adverse effect to those properties that have been identified. And another 20 to 30% of our cases end at no adverse effect. Adverse effects are actually a fairly small number of our caseload, even though it has increased in the last 10 years. So an adverse effect occurs when the effect of an undertaking causes the integrity of historic property to be diminished. And that can be direct, so a bulldozer going through the middle of it. That's fairly easy to understand. Or the windows are all being ripped out, all the historic windows, and being replaced with white vinyl. Those direct effects are a lot easier for us to understand, but we do have in both regulations the indirect effect, the visual or the atmospheric effects. So those can be auditory, they can be visual, and they can be atmospheric, meaning like dust. And we've had consultations here that worried about indirect effects from vibration of coal trucks and their impact on historic downtowns. We've had consultations on the impact of dust on rock imagery panel, Native American rock imagery panels, not just in 9 Mile, but elsewhere. So it is trying to look at all the effects of your undertaking, even though you might be only permitting an oil and gas truck to use the road. Well, is that increase in travel going to increase dust? And therefore, do we need to take into account the impact of dust? The other one is a little bit harder for us to assess, but it does come up a little bit here and there, is reasonably foreseeable effects, cumulative, later in time, or at a distance. So this is something that's really tricky for us to assess, and the agencies have a tricky there too, because it's really hard to understand what's the future effect. If you allow a new road to be constructed for a specific purpose, but into an area that's never had road access, what are the effects beyond your undertaking to now having the public access all those roads and now enter by motor vehicle into areas that have never been motorized before? What are those effects going to look like? Cumulative effects. This is really hard when we talk about really UDAM projects, not singling you guys out, but you guys do so many little teeny projects. At what point do we look at, well, you've taken 50 feet of a canal 15 times over the last 10 years. At what point do we have a cumulative effect impact? Those are also a very hard thing for us to assess. Same as like thinking about a historic downtown neighborhood, one building being removed, 30 being removed over 15 years, maybe a little bit trickier. And then we have to think about all the resources and their characteristics, because not everything is created equal. There's a lot of difference between a Native American lithic scatter, a historic homestead, the Gunnison Star Theater. Like all of those things have different characteristics and integrity that we need to assess the undertaking on. The agency can propose a no adverse effect. So you're touching it, but it's not a bad touch. That is where you're not having that diminishment of defining characteristics. So you can make that call, set that in a letter, justify it, describe why you can avoid that adverse effect finding, and that could be avoidance, That could be burrowing under a canal. There's a lot of ways you could get to a no adverse effect. You document that, we review it, other consulting parties under federal law have a chance to review it, and generally we're in agreement. Those of you that do wildlife or wildland habitat improvement, hand thinning trees in archaeological sites is much better than running a bullhog through them. So we usually say that's a no adverse effect. If we're good, then you get a letter back from us. If we disagree, then we further consult. We can ask the advisory council under federal cases if we dispute the agency's no adverse effect finding. We have never personally disputed that finding because the agencies we deal with have usually been very open and lets us work through it. But we have had cases from consulting parties objecting to the no adverse effect finding and asking the advisory council in DC to weigh in to see if their finding was correct. That's another reason why we're your partner. We want to help you build that argument so that if it does go to the advisory council, that you have our support. We've helped you tighten your bolts so that argument can be satisfied. And again, keep a record. Keep a record. I don't know how many days a week we get a phone call or an email like, hey, do you have consultation records for us from the 90s? Like, don't you have your own? Oh no, we disposed of them all. You're legally responsible to have those records on your end, not us. But usually we have boxes downstairs that Savannah and I or Hanson will go paw through on your behalf if you need that from us. So step 3, if you hit that no adverse effects finding, you're done. We agree, we're good. But if your project does have what we consider an adverse effect, then we go to step 4. Which again is only about 7 to 8% of all our cases fall into that. Back when I started, it was only about 3%. So adverse effects have increased, but I think that's just a reflection on the number of broadband projects, that there's only so many places you can move lines or road projects. So I think we've seen an increase just because a lot of the types of projects we see now are hard to avoid. In that case, you still consult with us. You say it's an adverse effect because of these reasons. And then we work with you to figure out how to avoid, minimize, and or mitigate those adverse effects. So minimize might still be an adverse effect, but we're minimizing the lasting impact. If we agree that it is an adverse effect, under federal law, we will execute what is called an MOA, a Memorandum of Agreement. It's not necessarily required under state law. There is no provision in 98404 that says you will create an MOA. All it says is that you will sign an agreement with us, or you will have some sort of an agreement document with us. So it's a little bit more flexible under state law. And that can even just be as simple as like a letter from the agency saying, we have an adverse effect. This is how we're going to mitigate it. Do you agree? We respond, we agree. That's enough for us under state law generally. The MOA is prepared by the agency. We have templates. The advisory council has templates. But the agency this is a legally binding agreement. So obviously your agency is going to have to be writing this. We have seen cases where consultants have been asked to draft MOAs or PAs, but unless that consultant has been through this rodeo, you spend more time fixing the MOA or PA than actually just executing it. So if you don't have a consultant that has that really great background, ask us. We have templates. I look at a lot of you federal partners out there. A lot of you probably not had to deal with an MOA or a PA. We do 15, 20 a year. So please lean on us to help you get examples from your state leads or state coordinators. And we can help you walk through that process. Under federal law, if you have an adverse effect, unless you have an agreement, you have to notify the advisory council and give them an opportunity to participate in the resolution of those adverse effects. They rarely do on simple projects, but they might on controversial projects or very large projects like huge transmission lines. They like to weigh in on those bigger impacts. And then at the end, whether they decide to participate or not, and we feel all good, every party signs that agreement. So the agency, or if there's multiple agencies, SHPOs, the proponent can sign these agreements. The Native American tribes can sign agreements, all in different categories. I'm not going to go into detail. Once that agreement's done, the mitigation standards have been agreed upon. We all sign it. It becomes executed. You file it with the advisory council. And then, again, the federal agency is responsible that the mitigation is carried out. agencies that sometimes like will put in there that the federal agency will ensure that the proponent will pay for these things. That's great, but you're still required as the agency to make sure that the proponent does those things and that they do the agreed upon stipulations. So the agency is still on the hook all the way through the process. Even if it's a decade after the undertaking's implementation and the MOA is that long, you're still on the hook. So step 4, resolve adverse effects. You end at an MOA or under state law, some other type of agreement. If you and us don't agree, then there's a council, or under state law, PLPCO, Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, has a stake there to help mitigate. I've never ran into that. I've never had our office and an agency refuse to agree on adverse effects resolutions. Now, that's only a 10-year window, and I know it happened before I started, and it will probably happen well after I'm dead, but generally we don't like that because there's always a path forward. Don't be scared of an adverse effect. There's an app for that. So there we go. We walked ourselves through the 4-step process. All 4 steps you can exit and be done. Both state and federal law allows you to do that flexibility. And hopefully through this step-by-step process, we have minimized the effect on historic properties, right? Like, I have never once said, yeah, let's plow through every archaeological and historic building we can. No, through the planning process, through these discussions, most projects end in a no adverse effect finding or a no historic properties finding, because the agencies, you all, are very good and responsive at that. These are the last 2 slides of principles to remember. Most projects do not have historic properties, but you need to go through the process to ensure that. The agency is responsible for all decisions. If you decide to terminate consultation with us, that's your right. I don't have a badge. I don't have a posse that will go and wrangle you. It's just the process is here to protect cultural resources. Everything's documented both on our end and your end. E106 is our best tool to track that. We're one of the first SHPOs to go full online virtual consultations, which has been so nice since 2017. Back in the old days when I started, it was the stacks of paper every Monday morning in the banker's box, and you went through each one by one. Oh, so much nicer now. Notify the public, seek comment when required. And then properties determined eligible for the National Register receive the same level of consideration as those listed. And then second principles, almost everything gets resolved between us and the agency. Very rarely do we have to take it to an advisory council weigh in, or if we disagree on the eligibility of a resource between the agency and us, we can ask the keeper of the National Register to weigh in. That's only happened twice in my 10 years, and both times it was a big waste of everybody's time to do that. The process has no predetermined outcome, same as NEPA, right? We can't have pre-decisions, so we should be going through a process and making the best decision. Something always gets done. There are people that are frustrated that cultural resource law can't stop projects, but the reason we still have a tool almost 60 years after its passage is because it doesn't have that ability to stop projects, is that it has never raised to the point where people that have policy-making decisions say this is a bad law because it's stopping a thing from occurring, whether both good or bad. So while it's always the game of Monopoly and keep passing go in cultural resource law, it's okay because it allows us to continue to have this tool. Good faith effort, that's a weird phrase. It's not well defined, but it's basically, if you know and you've followed the process well and you've helped us, you should have done a good faith effort. And then nothing is required of preservation. It just needs to be considered. And that's frustrating for some parties, but that's the reality, is that it's a process. So if you want more information on the Section 106 or the 98404 process, you can go to the Advisory Council, you can look up some information on the National Register, you can look up the laws itself, and feel free to give us calls or phone calls or emails or anything to help us help you guide through the process. Because every month there's a new thing we have to contend with because we've never seen it before, like things falling from Mars. Like, how do we deal with that as a consultation and impact to cultural resources? So we probably have a lot of information, but together we can all help navigate this process. So thanks everybody for probably some of you listening to this entire 45 minutes of me talking. But I'll end with another slide with our contact info. We now have our own shiny new SHPO website, ushpo.utah.gov, with all our contact info. And I appreciate everybody's time this morning. I know probably some of this was just a refresher and maybe mind-numbing to some of you, but it's always good for us to keep on the same page. And even the old practitioners probably got reminded of a few things during this process, I hope. So I will pause. We're 15 minutes ahead of schedule, but that's okay. But do we have some questions on this first part of the presentation? Wow. I'm going to do it like class and just start calling on people. No, I'm not actually going to do that. I don't see anybody frantically raising their hands, so I will turn this over to Savannah and see if we want to do our break now or do we want to move into the next section. But I appreciate everybody's time this morning, and hopefully the next time. A question. Marielle.
Oh, hey, great. You got my name right. First try. Thank you. I'm new to the area. I am detailing currently on the Manti La Salle as a North Zone archaeologist. And I had just a question. This presentation would actually be super helpful for some of the specialists who haven't interacted with an archaeologist much in a while. And it would be very nice if we could, whatever we are willing to share, it'd be great to have a copy.
Absolutely. You can have the recording if you want to just give them the link. We'll share the slide deck with everybody as well, because none of this is really proprietary. And it's great to meet you. And we have done on-site trainings for other agencies if they've needed it. So hopefully through a recording or a slide deck, you can get what you need. But if we need more involvement, please just reach out.
Will do. Thank you so much.
All righty. Thank you, Chris. You ended early and very surprising, but good job as always. I think we'll go ahead and take our break now. We'll do a full 15 minutes. So if everybody can return at 11:15, we'll go ahead and get me and Deb's presentation started. Thank you. All right. It's 11:15. So we're going to go ahead and get started once again. So let's see. Let me go ahead and present my screen here. All righty. Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about archaeological submission requirements today. I'm going to talk about things from the archaeological compliance review side, and then Deb is going to talk about things from the record side, things that come in through archaeological submissions, both Section 106 and 404, as well as Section 110. I want to preface this by saying that this is it's not going to be a comprehensive overview of everything we require. Rather, I would consider it to be kind of a supplement or a complement to what we have in our compliance guidance already. The reason for that is most of you are doing just a wonderful job of submitting archaeological dominated projects. You're meeting all the requirements. It's been going really, really well for the most part. However, in my 3 years at SHPO now, there are trends and questions that I see and that I notice get asked quite a bit, and trends of, people not doing this or people doing too much of this or, whatever it is. So this presentation is kind of geared towards your most common questions that we're seeing from the archaeological side as well as the record side for Deb. Everything that you need to know for archaeological submissions is already in our guidance document. And I'm just going to talk about that here for a minute. So everything I'm going to require today is located in the guidance document on these page numbers that I have listed here. And so The guidance document is always a great resource. A lot of folks, I don't think, even know it exists, which is part of the point of this presentation today. Chapter 3 of that guidance document is all the archaeological guidance, all the records requirements, basically everything you need to know. Chris Merritt wrote, the big chunk of that years and years ago. We've just finished a new revision of it, which I'll talk about in just a second. It's about 100 pages, so it's a lot of information, but you can use your control find function or whatever you need to get your information without reading the whole document. Before I go any further, I have this little note at the bottom. It would be awesome if you guys could look at the guidance before you ask me a question. You are always welcome to ask questions. We encourage it, and we do support it. But most of your questions are already answered in the guidance document. So if you could check the guidance document before asking a question, that would be much, much appreciated. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to talk about our new guidance, which most of you have not seen yet. I know Chris said at the beginning of his presentation that we'd send it out or that you might have it. It's actually in its last form of revision, so it's not quite going to be released because we're still working on very last minute edits that we've gotten from agencies through the interagency task force. But here is basically what's new and what you can expect when we do send it out, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, definitely before the end of the year, you'll see that. The biggest change is it is now called the Cultural Resource Compliance Guidance. So before many of you will know, we had the Archaeological Compliance Guidance document and our Historic Buildings and Structures Guidance. We have combined that all into one. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's kind of a general trend in our office over the past couple of years of joining the historic buildings and the archaeological side of things. We're requiring more holistic documentations of resources because we are seeing, as Chris mentioned, more complex archaeological sites that have structures such as, campground sites on Forest Service lands that are now coming into 50 years of age. A lot of work is being done on them through the Great American Outdoors Act, the Infrastructure Act. So we're kind of going in this holistic direction of just treating cultural resources as both archaeological and historic buildings and joining them together. So in that new guidance document, as I said, the archaeological guidance is chapter 3. For the most part, there's a few other archaeological things in other chapters. And then the historic buildings and structures guidance is in chapter 6, as well as in some appendices of that document. I also wrote underwater guidance for archaeological sites, which is in chapter 4 of that guidance document. Most of you will not deal with archaeological guidance or underwater archaeological resources. That's something that a very small subset of agencies in the state deal with. But I thought it was needed and necessary due to some of the projects that may or may not be coming up. I'm not sure anymore for underwater resources, but also it addresses eligibility and a little bit about how to deal with resources that were previously submerged underwater and now are terrestrial sites. They are now on land once again due to the drought, which is obviously a huge trend that we've been seeing. I've been seeing articles from all over the state and the world of archaeological sites being exposed because of the drought. So it addresses a little bit of that too. So I do hope that will be of help to you. It's more going to address like how to identify or our expectations for identification of underwater archaeological sites, as well as how to assess effects and mitigation. It doesn't really go into like survey strategies because that is something that's very, very complicated and it's too much for what we need here in Utah. So I do reference a couple of nationwide documents if you are interested in going into the weeds for that kind of thing. We've also included a new chapter, which includes guidance on documentation and evaluation of special site types, which we are kind of characterizing as recreational facilities. So those campgrounds on Forest Service land, like I mentioned, routes, historic trails and routes, such as climbing routes. historic dams, as well as a very loose recommendation for arborglyph site definition. That's something that's come up quite a lot in the past couple of years of, how do you define an archaeological site if it's an arborglyph site? So we provide guidance on those site types in Chapter 5. And then we also clarify the UTIPO authority, the new UTIPO authority within the exterior boundaries of the Uinta and Ouray Reservation in Chapter 2. In addition to, for records, there is also new vanity URLs for Sego and Hub. So very easy, sego.utah.gov. Very short and sweet there. And then I also have a note there at the bottom. When we send out this new guidance, it's also going to come along with new versions of the SHPO cover sheet, new versions of the short form, the short cultural resource form, in addition to, I think, a couple of other things. And the reason for that is we have a new logo. We're actually a new division within Department of Cultural and Community Engagement of the state of Utah. So I went through, I updated our logo on everything. So be on the lookout for that. And I believe Chris will be sending that out to his listservs, all you guys, but that will be coming soon. So what I'm going to talk about today are all of these things here. To save time, I'm not going to go over them. So the submission portal is E106. I'm not going to talk about E106 today because that's not what this training is about, but I just wanted to mention it. Most, if not all of you, know what E106 is. You've used E106, you have an E106 account, but I just wanted to make sure I put the link in here. This is what the homepage looks like, this screenshot down here. And then I also wanted to note that it does take up to 2 gigs in storage. That is a question I get quite frequently, is, people don't have, enough, or E106, sorry, does not have enough storage for people to upload their large documents. And we do get quite large zip files and other documents through E106, but it is able to take up to 2 gigs. So I think that should cover pretty much any file size that an agency would need to upload into E106. But if we ever have a problem with file size, we can work on that together. So starting at the beginning, and a lot of you already know this, so this is kind of geared towards, like I said, common questions I've gotten, common things I've seen throughout reviews, and then also really gearing towards those new archaeologists and those new Section 106 practitioners that we're seeing in the state of Utah right now. So the consultation letter is one of the most important parts, if not the most important part, of your Section 106 and UCA 9-8-404 process. As Chris mentioned in his presentation, documentation is very, very essential. And what documentation looks like is a consultation letter. That is the bureaucracy. That is, the Section 106 process, our SHPO's role, that is regulated. So the consultation letter has to be signed by the agency official. I've been seeing a lot of consultation letters that are not actually signed by the agency official. Your agency official is up to you. That's not something I'm going to police. I don't know what your organizational structure is at your agency. I don't know who that person is that has delegated authority to make official Section 106 determinations. But as Chris said, the agency is responsible for everything. So if a nonprofit or other organization wants to litigate your agency, the person who has signed your consultation letter is the responsible party on behalf of your agency. And so make sure it has that signature. And obviously it validates it, makes it more legally binding. So I know it's a bit of a hassle with, we're all digital now. A lot of people don't have, ability to scan, or I don't know, whatever you do, insert your signature into a digital document. But it's really appreciated to have an agency official signature. I've been sending some reviews back that don't have them, and I'm probably going to have to start sending more back because of the amount I'm seeing that don't have signed. So please make sure it's signed. Make sure you're describing your identification efforts. So don't leave that up to the contractor. We have a lot of agencies that consult with us that don't have an archaeologist, and maybe just somebody who takes on the role of Section 106 consultation. Don't rely on your contractor to just completely describe what was done. and your determinations of eligibility and effect. That's something that has to be reflected in the agency consultation letter as well. So make sure you're listing out what identification efforts were completed per the regulations, as Chris discussed. If you have a report title, go ahead and list it in there. List your archaeological sites and make a formal determination of eligibility. So as Chris noted, even if you had a contractor do your archaeological survey, it is the agency that still needs to make your official determination of eligibility and effect. So even if the contractor is just recommending eligibility, you as the agency are making that legally binding official decision through your consultation letter. Over here on the right, this is our example or our template letter. This is for a federal undertaking, so it has Section 106 language in there. You can use this template for state undertakings if you'd like. Just change it to UCA 9-8-404 instead of Section 106. You'll notice there's a table of archaeological sites that says, your site number, the type, the eligibility criteria, and effect. That is our preferred submission format for archaeological sites. Some agencies like to submit archaeological sites in kind of a narrative format. The table is a little easier to review, but as long as you have that information in there, that's just great. States your determination of effect with a rationale. So here I have listed the 3 determinations of effect. These are the determinations that are in the regulations. This is the specific language. So no historic property affected, no adverse effect, and adverse effect. I see a lot of consultations that say no effect, just no effect is all it says. Technically, that's not really an official determination. I know what you mean. I know you mean no historic property affected. So that's what I'm going to put in my letter back to you. But these are the 3 determinations that we officially recognize. So make sure you're adding that in there. It would also be wonderful if you could add a couple of sentences of rationale, if you will, for why you have that determination of effect. A lot of the times I'll get a consultation letter that says, we have 3 archaeological sites, they're all eligible, so therefore no adverse effect. Well, what are you doing to those archaeological sites and how is it not going to be an adverse effect? I would like to know a little more information there. A lot of the times that information is in the archaeological report, which is, supplemental material to the submission. But you as the agency, you are making that a formal determination. It is your responsibility to provide a rationale or a backup for that determination. So it would be awesome to just include a few sentences of why you've had that determination of effect. We also see a lot of consultations that are requesting SHPO to be a consulting party. And I understand SHPO might just be on your mailing list to all consulting parties for an undertaking. That is not needed. As Chris said, SHPO is always a consulting party. We don't ever need to be invited, and we don't ever need to respond to an invitation because it is always assumed that we are a consulting party automatically. We consult on all undertakings. If it is a large and complex undertaking, a notification is appreciated. You can send that to us via email. You can submit it in E106. I might not send a response letter, but you are welcome to do that. We don't need the actual consulting party request, though. In addition, the APE and identification effort consultations are sometimes appropriate, but not all the time required. So most of you, the way that your agencies are completing the Section 106 and 404 processes is they're completing their entire undertaking, making determinations of eligibility and effect, as well as APE and identification efforts. And then they're sending all of that to us in one letter. Like, I will not have heard of the undertaking before I see it, all those final determinations. In the regulations, SHPO, you can initiate consultation with SHPO earlier on, which is what, a notification letter would be for, a larger complex undertaking. If it is a large and complex, maybe controversial undertaking, it would be appropriate to kind of initiate your consultation and get our concurrence on your area of potential effects determination and your identification efforts determination. It's not needed very often, but if you have an undertaking that you know is going to be scrutinized and it's very large and complex, we do recommend that you submit a letter requesting our concurrence on APE and identification effort. That way you have more of a backing. If something were to happen, you have multiple consultations and SHPO concurrences as you go along the process. So you get those concurrences before you actually go out and do your identification efforts. So you can make sure we agree. You'll go do them. Once we do agree, then you'll have your final determinations of eligibility in effect. Alrighty. So quickly, I'm not really going to talk about reports, but I wanted to note there's a bit of confusion about the short form versus the negative report form. I think the short form was originally intended to be negative report form. So it's that SHPO report form that Chris wrote however many years ago. And it was meant to just reflect negative finding survey. So you're not finding anything on the ground. I think we've loosened that up a little bit recently. A lot of folks have been using it just as a short cultural resource report form. So if you have a few findings, maybe some IOs, maybe a site or two, your undertaking's like around 100 acres, we are totally fine if you complete what I'm calling now the short cultural resource report form. And that is perfectly acceptable, especially in those instances where, and this is in the guidance, but historic contexts aren't necessary for all reports. If you just have a very small 100-acre survey, we're not going to expect a full historic context. And I'll actually talk about that in a minute. But yeah, the short cultural resource report form is appropriate to use in a lot of circumstances. And then a lot of people don't submit SHPO cover sheets with the short form because we do have like this section up here with the box and it says the APE acreage. A lot of this information is probably redundant or with the SHPO cover sheet. But we still need the SHPO cover sheet just because that's required with all submissions. It's what records looks at when they open up a report and they need to see the acreage, who the PI is when they're doing their data entry. So make sure you're submitting the SHPO cover sheet with the short form. Site forms, so again, common things I've been seeing with site forms submitted recently in the past year or two. Make sure you submit your site forms in individual PDFs. Folks that are maybe Section 106 practitioners, but not archaeologists, contractors often do just add the site forms right to the end of the report and like a continuous document. That's very not convenient for us. We would have to go and split every site form from that PDF. So that's why we ask you to submit them in individual files. The Smithsonian Trinomial is the file name and it's zipped up into a zip file and uploaded into E106 that way. This next thing is something we've kind of started doing recently, and I don't think we're going to be enforcing it for a while or maybe like increasing enforcement. But we've kind of had a new streamlined records process on our end, and the fillable PDFs for the site forms are actually not ideal for our records process. So if you all could start getting rid of the fillable PDF fields before submitting the site form to us, that would be amazing. I'm going to go over in a second just one way how to do that. I know maybe not all agencies have that capabilities, like what their computer allows them to do. And also, please do not submit PDF portfolios or Utah Archaeology site forms in individual parts. So sometimes we'll get like part A, part B, part C. Think about UDAM, what you're looking in UDAM. It's one site form, all the parts, you got your maps, your photos, it's all one document. That's how we want to see the site form come in from the E106 submissions. So please don't submit individual parts. or PDF portfolios. It's a huge hassle on our part, and I'll probably send it back if you do. The fillable fields issue. So for the archaeologists on the call, most if not all of you have run into the fillable fields PDF issue if you use that fillable PDF site form. And that is characterized as one of the examples is the recording year. So say you're recording in 2022, duplicates to the non-architectural type field in part B and C. So if you put 2022 in your site form, you combine it with your part B and C, 2022 will be in the non-architectural type field line in part B and C. The reason for that is it's kind of complicated, but the fields were connected when somebody built the fillable PDF. And I've actually fixed that. So I want to show you guys. This is Google Drive, which this is this link right here, and we'll send this slide deck out as well as a link to this. And I hope you all have access to Google Drive, and if you do not, just let me know and I can send these to you. But I have fixed that issue. So if you use the A, B, and C parts in this Google Drive folder, that issue is no longer apparent. I went through and I renamed the type field for every one of these to unique. Amber, no leading zeros for Smith tries, but for project numbers, there's at least one leading zero, I think. Sorry, answering Amber Van Alphen's question. So please use these if you can have access to Google Drive. If you are starting from scratch, just do this at the beginning, save yourself some trouble with that connected fields issue. However, if you do have an existing site form, say maybe a contractor filled it out, or you already have it filled out and you don't want to copy and paste or rewrite the entire site form, you can use these steps to get rid of that fillable fields issue. Basically, these steps perform the Adobe print to PDF process. So if you have Adobe open, there's that print symbol. If you click that print symbol and then save the file as a new document, it will actually get rid of all of those fillable fields. So if you have the connected fields issue, what we recommend is saving each part separately and getting rid of the fillable fields. So save A in this process, get rid of the fillable fields, save part B, part C, and so on. Then you combine. And then there's no fillable fields at that point. So you won't have that connected fields issue. However, you can also use this process. Say you use the new US forms that I fixed. There's no fillable connected issue, but we prefer no fillable fields at all to be submitted to us now. So you can use this process to get rid of the fillable fields completely. Say you already have the combined site form, just click that print button, save it as a new document. That'll get rid of all of the fillable fields. And I think that's just one way. I've gotten some feedback from other folks that maybe their agency does not allow for that. So I'm sure there's other ways, and we can look into it if you need suggestions. And if you really can't, we are happy to make exceptions. We have that capability on our end, but the most you guys can do, much appreciated there, for getting rid of the fillable fields. Historic structures, as many of you know who have submitted archaeological sites with historic structures on them, we've been requesting HSFs, which stands for Historic Site Form, and it is our Historic Buildings and Structures Site Form to be an addendum to the Utah Archaeology Site Form. So if you have a standing structure on your archaeological site, we're probably going to request, if you don't have it already, a historic site form. And we have been seeing a lot of folks already including that historic site form into the submission. So we really, really appreciate that. Something we're going to continue requesting, continuing with that trend of like holisticness of, archaeological and historic buildings. One big happy family. Oh yeah, I also wanted to mention, go back to this Google Drive really quick. that there is a Part D short form. So anybody who's done the rock art form knows how long and tedious it is. Yes, Clay, include the HSF in a single PDF at the end of the Utah Archaeology site form. This is a short form for Part D. This was actually developed in concert with the BLM and the Utah Rock Art Research Association. We've decided through the interagency task force that this can be used statewide now. So if you have a rock art component to your site, you can go ahead and use this short form now, something that I'm using in my documentations. And this will be just fine. You don't have to fill out the full Part D. If you would like, obviously, you're more than welcome to. But just wanted to mention that this is also located in that Google Drive now. Quick note about naming conventions. And this might be more of just a pet peeve of mine, but make sure you have our naming conventions, which are basically project number and then project number underscore whatever it is, tabular data, GIS data, site forms. We get a lot of submissions where it's like project number and then it's like internal agency, whatever your internal agency number is, or like, whatever your file naming system is at your agency. If you could stick to the naming conventions, that would be really great. Save me some time because I do have to rename those before everything goes over to records. If you do not have a project number, which is appropriate in some circumstances, and Deb will talk about that, just go ahead and name as appropriately as you can. So for example, if you have a consultation that's just one site form, you don't have a report or anything, just name, Smith Try underscore GIS, Smith Try underscore tabular. Just do it as appropriately as you can. But try not to include any extra numbers or naming systems because, I don't know what those are. I have to rename them. And yeah, I appreciate if you could do that. For GIS data, make sure you're including project and site GIS. So for those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with the archaeological process, but you are a Section 106 practitioner consulting with us, we need two sets of GIS data. One is the survey area. The second is the site boundaries area. So say you have a submission that's just a report that reflects a survey without any archaeological sites documented. In that case, you will just need one set of GIS data. But if you have archaeological sites in that submission, you need two. The naming conventions for that would be lowercase p and then your project number for the project GIS, which is the survey area GIS, and then underscore s, project number for your sites. Make sure it's a shapefile or a GBD file, no layers. What we require is shapefile and GBD. For the most part, you guys are doing awesome on GIS data, like really, really good. We're not seeing barely any issues. One thing I do want to mention though, GIS data needs to reflect your survey area. Now, 99% of the time, that is the exact same as your area of potential effects. So people conflate the two, like your APE, your survey area for GIS. Think about what you look at in Sego. If you have access to Sego, which is our archaeological database, which shows all the archaeological surveys and sites in the state, the blue layer, the investigations layer in Sego, shows what is surveyed. Now, that is what we're getting through E106 submissions. So if you're submitting GIS data that is your APE, but not necessarily reflects your survey area, that's going to go into Sego as surveyed when it's not necessarily surveyed. So make sure that your GIS data is reflecting your survey area, not your area of potential effects. This mostly happens in the case of cell tower projects. So I've got an example over here. This red circle is the APE. Now, if we get a perfect circle for GIS data, you didn't go out and survey a perfect circle, obviously. That's a visual effects APE. So make sure that the GIS actually reflects what you surveyed on the ground, which could be, it's probably this little square in this example here. So just to be aware of that. And I do try to check that. Deb tries to check that, but we don't catch everything with the amount of cases and the amount of data we get. So if you guys could help us make sure that we are reflecting survey area, that would be awesome. We have got some questions in here. So Rochelle. Yeah, I think so, Rochelle. If you have she asks, is it appropriate to use your agency project number if you don't have a survey or a SHPO project number? I think so. But if you have a Smith Tri or Smith archaeological site, make sure it's just named like your Smith Tri, and then for the GIS and Tabular, Smith Tri _ Tabular, Smith Tri _ GIS. But your consultation letter can be named an agency project number. If you have like a supplemental document that's not necessarily a report, you can name it whatever you want in that case, because it's not going to the archaeological record side. It's just going to stay in the case file. How much of a structure has to be present to include a historic structure form? Would it be needed for just a foundation or cellar hole? No, Angela, not for a foundation or cellar. I think Chris Hansen, maybe you can jump in, but our general rule of thumb is like, if it's standing, provide a structure form. So, if it's above your knees, if in height, provide a structure form. But if it's a foundation, it's something that's maybe crumbled a little bit, but it was a building, now it's more archaeological. In that case, you don't need a historic structures form. If you've got walls, standing walls, roof, I would say yes, structure form. And if you don't really know, if you're like on the fence, you can ask us for sure. Yeah, no problem. So for preliminary reviews, this is something that I'm not sure all of you knew that we did provide, or we do provide preliminary reviews. But due to an increase in larger complex projects and also just an increase in reviews, we're not able to provide preliminary reviews in all instances. So we've kind of written an official policy for preliminary reviews. I'll go ahead and read it. I know this is a lot of text, so I'll just read it to you real quick. Preliminary review is an unofficial and precursory review by the Utah SHPO to provide comments on eligibility, effect, and other aspects of reports or site forms while they are still in the editing process. This is provided to ensure quality official Section 106 submissions that won't be returned with edits, usually to improve project and review timelines. However, due to the increase in Section 106 cases submitted to the Utah SHPO, we are not able to provide preliminary review for all archaeological projects or undertakings. The following projects will be eligible for preliminary review by the Utah SHPO. Projects with a tight timeline due to political pressure or funding deadlines. This does not include consulting firm contract deadlines, though. Large and complex project where preliminary review would significantly reduce editing period. Preliminary review in batches is preferred there, say if you have a lot of site forms, or controversial projects. Preliminary reviews will be second priority to officially submitted Section 106 reviews through the E106 system. And keep in mind that the turnaround time might be 2 to 3 weeks. So this is something that we've kind of officially written. I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of saw it, was aware of it, and kind of our requirements for preliminary review. I think this goes for like saying you're not asking us to formally review something, but we don't need to see every project before it gets submitted. Our policy has always been early and often consultation. And for the most part, we do really stand by that, and we want to keep that. But if you really just have like a really simple run-of-the-mill undertaking, I don't necessarily need to see it via email or whatever it is before you submit it in E106. So there is a line there. I mean, I'm only one person. I have, I do about 1,000 archaeological reviews a year, plus, constant emails of people asking questions and others, meetings and trainings. So, yeah. I'm always happy to answer questions. I know that, like Chris said, like there's gray areas everywhere. There are things that we've never seen before that come up like almost on a monthly basis. But a couple of things here and there, I think that we can officially kind of have a stance on will help me balance my workload, and you guys have also still kind of keep that open and transparent communication with us as well. On that note, just wanted to know, and I think we've mentioned this, in the past couple of years, but it is taking me longer to do reviews, and I think Chris Hansen as well. We're seeing a lot of reviews, and not necessarily even an increase in numbers, but an increase in bigger, more complex cases. As Chris Mara mentioned, the percentage of adverse effects has really gone up in the past couple of years, and that's because of the federal acts that are going on, the state funds, state-funded projects, the state initiatives. And so just be patient. Review time is probably not going to be as fast as you have been expecting. I will usually turn around the very short, easy reviews pretty quickly, like your no historic properties affected reviews. But if you have a large batch of site forms, no adverse effect reviews, and adverse effect reviews, it's probably going to take me a little more than it was in the past. So, and then a note about UTIPO submissions. I think most of you well understand this process, and it actually only applies to a small subset of you anyways that work in the basin or have projects in the basin or have federal land. But SHPO no longer had Section 106 authority over anything in the exterior boundaries of the Uinta and Ouray Reservation. This map here, that red dotted line, that is the Uinta and Ouray Reservation. It covers almost all of Uinta and Duchesne counties, and it includes federal and private land. So if you have a federal undertaking on federal land, BLM Forest Service, even private land, we have no authority over that anymore for Section 106. So if you have a project, make sure not to request concurrence. We can't provide it. However, we are requesting that you submit the data to us if you did conduct a survey within that submission or within the undertaking. So that submission can be through you as the agency. If you want to submit it through the U106 account, great. If you want the consultant to do it, that's also fine. We just want to make it as easy as possible on you guys. And this data sharing is something that we have worked out with Betsy Serpoos and the UTIPO. So make sure you're sending us the data for those UTIPO projects. And in any way you can get it to us, your consultant, we don't need to see a letter. It's something that I will not even look at. I will just make sure all the files are there, and I'm going to transfer it directly to records. And you'll notice if you do this, there are several specific fields within E106 for UTIPO submissions now that we've added. So if you're looking at the E106 public list of our publicly available cases, you'll see that, there's some that are TIPO. And another important point, UTIPO does not apply to state land or state funding. So SITLA, you still have to do 404, or you have to consult with us through 404. If there's a state funded projects within the basin, it's still going to come through us as SHPO. Now, it gets a little messy because, there's SITLA land dotted within the reservation. If it is a federal undertaking and you have a federal agency as your lead, it's a federal undertaking at that point. It's Section 106. You go ahead and you can probably just consult with UTIPO in those instances. Yeah, that includes DOGM projects, Tessie. So DOGM, you still have to consult with us unless your project is federalized, unless you have your federal, I'm blanking your federal equivalent agency right now. But yeah, DOGM projects will be consulting with us in the basin. And Justina, Starvation, yeah, you are state anyways. So even if Starvation is in the reservation, unless you have any federal component, still consult with us. For projects that are joint jurisdiction, which we've been seeing those, like there's some, out here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but some out of the reservation, some portions within. In those instances for now, I will just be commenting on the portion of the undertaking outside the boundaries. So I still will comment on the outside portion, and I will leave everything within the reservation to Betsy. Submitting Section 110 projects or canceled undertakings. This is something I get a lot of questions about. So despite being named E106, it is still appropriate to submit your Section 110 projects or your canceled undertakings through E106. So if you have data that to get to us, if you have eligibility requests, submit it through E106. It doesn't have to be technically a Section 106 or compliance undertaking. Project number assignments still apply to Section 110, and Deb's going to talk about project numbers. Our preferred method, if you are submitting Section 110 or a canceled undertaking project, make sure you request eligibility concurrence for your archaeological sites if you can. That way we can get them in as SHPO concurred in our system. That is, I think, just the best way for management going forward on your lands as well as for us. So if it's within the 10-year range, you have a bunch of sites or a site, you have reports, go ahead and write an eligibility concurrence request, submit it to us, and I will, concur on it officially. We'll get those in as SHPO concurred into our system. However, a lot of you have legacy projects. I think in almost every field office for, your main land management agencies, you guys all have legacy projects that are very old. So if you have a project that's older than 10 years, you can submit those directly to Deb through the ARC Records email account. You can submit it in E106 if the files are too large to send over email. But I don't need to see those. You don't need to write an eligibility request because, quite frankly, we're not going to provide eligibility concurrence on something that's over 10 years old in documentation. If you would like to go and do site revisits and do, updated documentation, we'd be more than happy to. But if it's older than 10 years, there's no way of really knowing if the site has changed, if the condition has changed. So we won't provide concurrence in those cases. So if you have something over than 10 years, send it to Deb. If it's under 10 years, go ahead and submit it through E106 with an eligibility concurrence request. All right, cultural sensitivity training. Most of you probably do not know what this is. This is something that I wrote a couple of years ago when I started. It is a cultural sensitivity training handout document, whatever you want to call it. It's meant for on-the-ground workers. So in a lot of instances, I will recommend a cultural sensitivity training in my consultation. That might be in the instance, say, you didn't get an archaeological survey done. Maybe it's not much of a concern, but I still want the people on the ground to have that cultural sensitivity training so they know what cultural resources look like. They know the discovery protocols. That is what this cultural sensitivity training is for. If you don't have this, I will more than happy to send it to you. I know a lot of agencies have your internal sensitivity trainings. That's just fine. But I did want to note that thanks to the BLM and thanks to some folks here at the state, we have translated the sensitivity training into Spanish, which is this version over here on the right. We got some feedback from the BLM that a lot of the workers were predominantly Spanish speaking, especially for vegetation treatment projects. So thanks to Chris and some other people here in our department, we got that translated into Spanish. So we have two versions. I'm actually going to have Chris go ahead and send this out with our new guidance and everything, so you guys will have it. But this is something that is always good to provide your workers. It's something they can just have in their trucks, something that they can just refer to if they need it. And this isn't the whole thing, obviously. It's many pages long. Well, not many. It's 5 pages. And there's actually a quiz at the end, too, if somebody's so inclined to take the quiz. And then let's see, last but not least, I just want to talk about some general guidance. This is directly from our cultural resource compliance guidance document. But never hurts for, a reminder. So the first one is, well, seemingly a no-brainer. The report, agency letter, and report itself should make specific reference to the agency and what regulatory framework you're consulting under. So what's your agency? What laws are you consulting under? A lot of the times there'll be joint jurisdictional reviews. For the regulatory side, there'll be Section 106 and 404 that your undertaking applies to. So make sure you note that in the consultation letter, because in my letter responding back to you, I will include language for both laws in my letter back to you. Agencies must review a consultant report before submission to Utah SHPO, not only to provide quality assurance, but also you need to make your formal determinations of eligibility and effect. But to be quite honest, we have had submissions in the past year or two that no archaeologist looked at it before me. And that's not my job, to be a quality, to do your editing, to be a quality QA/QC process. So make sure you're looking over that. It helps everybody. It helps me review your project quicker and getting it through so you can start your project. And yeah, reports should be free. Yeah, along these lines, reports should be free of, grammatical edits and spelling errors. We might return it if it does have those things. Agencies should work with consultants to ensure the cultural context portions of the report are appropriate with the scale of undertaking. So like I mentioned before when I was talking about the short cultural resource report form, not all projects need a cultural context. Some do, and some it's really important to. So just because we say not all need one doesn't mean that you shouldn't put one, because especially for an undertaking where you have a lot of historic resources, maybe historic mining resources, there will be impacts to historic resources. It's really important to provide a historic context in order to provide proper eligibility assessments within that context. So there's been, a couple of instances where we've returned a report based on the cultural context. But like I said, for those short 100-acre surveys, no findings, we're not expecting a cultural context. So if you have questions about our expectations there, and it is going to vary on a case-by-case basis, feel free to reach out. But I just wanted to mention that. Make sure you're following the digital submission standards, which Deb is going to talk about some of those. And then I've already mentioned when documenting historic buildings and structures, using the historic site form, in addition to the archaeological site form, is when appropriate. And like Clay asked in the chat, that is going to be attached to your Utah archaeology site form. One of the reasons for that, just very quickly, and then I'll pass everything along to Deb, the historic site forms are actually, they are publicly accessible through our historic buildings database. Obviously, the archaeological site forms are not, as Chris talked about, it's protected by law. So if we have a historic structure within an archaeological site, we want to make sure that that is protected data because it's within the archaeological site. And that is part of the reason why it's going to be attached to the Utah archaeology site form. So it all goes into the protected archaeological database and not accidentally into the publicly accessible buildings database. So that is my section. I don't know if we have any additional questions right now. Let me look before I turn it over to Deb. And then we have a whole block of time for questions after Deb's presentation as well. So yeah, feel free to ask in the chat or raise your hand whenever you'd like. And yeah, we can put a link to the cultural sensitivity training, Justina. I might just send it to you. I'm not sure if we have a Google Drive link, or I can set that up, but we'll figure it out either way.
Do you want to switch sharing so I can click through my slides, Savannah, or do you want to click through them for me?
I can just click through them for you, and then I'll stop sharing when you do the tutorials.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. So if there's no questions, I haven't been looking at the chat, I'll just get going. I'll try to make it a little little pithier. I'm not much of a chatter when it comes to presentations and training. So what we're going to go over in this is the project number requests, kind of requirements for that, Smith number requests, all the data for final submissions. Savannah went over most of that, but I just kind of want to go over a few little things about why we need all of it and how it works together, which brings us to the making it all work together point. And then we'll do a quick Sego and UDAM tutorial. So first, for project number assignments, I have animations. When do we need a project number? So we need a project number for class 3 investigations, monitoring resulting in a discovery, or as we just kind of like to think about it, is any boots on the ground activity. Any class 1s, we do not need a project report number. So unless it's going to eventually get one and go through the class 3 and 106 kind of process, we don't need one. So, and then how do we obtain a number? So email archrecords@utah.gov, any of the report title, any of the PI. I need what counties the work is going to be done in, the landowners, and any field supervisors that you're going to have. So email all of this. No spatial information is needed. I don't do anything with that. So a lot of people like to attach the shape files for it or the township range section. I don't need that. I just need this basic information to assign a report number, and I'll send it back to you as soon as I can. Those go pretty quickly. So requesting Smithsonian numbers is a little bit different. So I need site boundaries for the Smithsonian numbers, and I need those because they become sort of a placeholder spatially, so that when other people go to request a number, we don't sort of double book a number. So include the following in your shape file, or if you don't have a shape file, you can do a KMZ. Those work great. I can convert them here. So I need your temporary number, which in the field of the template is called like the agency number. So your temporary number, your project number, which you should have gotten from the previous screen. What date you recorded it, who recorded it, initials are great, just the individual or individuals who recorded it, and then what site, class, historic, prehistoric, or multi-component, and just a general site type. If there's several site types, just kind of do like the major one that like anybody else out on the ground would like see first. So these, like I said, these boundaries become a placeholder in Sego so that we can have a visual of what's already been recorded on the ground. So it doesn't get two site numbers. And, you know, we do the best we can at reducing that double booking, but, you know, we are just one person right now in records running the email. So, you know, errors do happen, and I try my best not to allow that. So, class 1 searches. So after you've received your project number, before you go out into the field to go do any looking at the ground, you need to do a class 1 background, and Chris touched on this a lot in one of the steps that he was talking about, step 1. And so you can do you can do a variety of different ways to do background searches. So you can use Sego, and which is our online application, and UDAM, which is sort of the sister application with it. Sego is a spatial, like a mapping search tool. And then you can use UDAM, which is our repository of the archaeological resources, investigations, forms, and reports. You can do that yourself on Sego. There's a fee for accessing Sego unless you have a data sharing agreement with us. It can be anywhere from $200 to $500 depending on the amount of users. Anyone who receives or requests spatial data from us or who views records in UDAM needs to have the user agreement signed, and that is also in that antiquities documentation folder that Savannah has that we sent out earlier in the chat and we'll send out later. So you have to sign that. It's just kind of a cover your butt situation so that we know that you are legitimate archaeologist in the state of Utah. You've been approved to view this privileged data. So the second way to get a class 1 search done is requesting a SHPO GIS search, and that's $15. I send you a little link, you pay for it, and then you get your results in a table. The third way to do it is a GIS SHPO cut, and that's $15 a section. So I take your APE and your buffer and I clip it to the township ranging sections, or sorry, these sections intersecting your APE or buffer. And I just package it all up and send it back to you, and that's $15 a section. So that's a really good time saver, so you don't have to digitize it yourself. So next, Savannah talked a lot about this, the final data submissions. I just kind of want to go over briefly why we need those. So we need the tabular, and that lives also on that Google Drive. We need the GIS with it formatted correctly, and the GIS should match the data standards from the guidance. And we need all these PDFs too. So if you want to click through that, Savannah. So I just did like little, the tabular submissions have, there's a template, and then also like just kind of a little how-to, like kind of pre-filled with all the different fields and things. So you can download those. They're circled in the red there. So why do we have so many things? We need the spatial, we have the tabular, and we have the PDF. We go to the next one. Making it all work together, making the meat, putting the meat through the meat grinder. So here's all of our pieces that you've submitted through the E106 process. The spatial and the tabular get processed. So Kira Westwater, she works for us part-time, and she processes the spatial data and formats the tabular data. So everything that gets sent through E106 goes to her initially, and she passes it. After she ingests it into GIS, she passes it off to me so that I can connect it with the tabular that she also formats. And we send to Tyson, who does our database management, and he puts it into the SQL database. So after he does that, I squish them all together and I publish them to Sego so that you can see all of the data behind the spatial. And then the PDFs, I process those according to, well, Kira puts them in the correct folders. I process them with the stamps and PDF-A them and then throw them into UDAM. Just kind of, I try to do it like once every couple weeks. Chris calls this process the snake eating its own tail. I prefer to think of a cute dog trying to eat its own tail. It's way cuter than a snake. Because as we know, archaeologists don't like snakes. And then I could do a quick Sego and UDAM tutorial, but also just to kind of touch on something that Savannah also said, we want your site forms. We want your reports that have your data that hasn't been through the 106 process. I'm going to put the stamp on it that says considered undetermined records received outside of SHPO process. Oh, the email was arcrecords@utah.gov. We also have a buildings website called the Hub. So a lot of you maybe have seen that in the corner of Sego, or there's a link to it. But Skylar Schultzke, he's also on the records team. He does all of the buildings updates for that spatial component that you get to see on the Hub. And it's, open to the public. There's no fee associated with the Hub since it is like free data. So I will, that's the end there. Does anyone have any questions before I do a presentation on Sego and UDAM?
Let me just do 2 points of clarification, Deb. So for the projects that are received outside Section 106, if you have an eligibility concurrence request for sites, we can stamp it concurred. If you do not, it'll get this stamp that Deb has on the slide here. And then please, please, please do not request project numbers for class 1s. We will cancel it. Class 1s do not need project numbers. There is on our website, in our guidance, there are like 3 or 4 qualifications or things thresholds that need to be met for project numbers. So survey on the ground, excavation on the ground, a large recording project in which a report is produced, and a monitoring report with discoveries. Those are the main categories in which we assign project numbers for. We do not assign them for class 1 literature reviews unless you're getting a class 3 as well. Just wanted to make that very clear because we've been getting a lot of folks requesting project numbers for not appropriate situations. And I will stop sharing and shut up now.
Thank you for clarifying that. I often don't know all the details. I'm not a very detailed person when it comes to some of these things. You definitely know them all. My details are in the data. So here we go.
Amber, she asked, you do a lot of boots on the ground site revisits. If you are filling out a report, Amber, for those site revisits, then get a project number. But if you're just going to submit archaeological site forms to us, no project number needed.
Okay, so here's Sego. If you have access to it, it's sego.utah.gov instead of the really weird inflated link that we were having before. We just had our IT redirect that really crazy link from sego.utah.gov. So you can just type that in now. So here's the splash page. Oh, sorry, side note. If you need access, email archrecords@utah.gov and let me know if you need access and I'll get back to you. So here's the splash screen. We'll do updates once a month-ish. So after I get all the data from E106 and then from Kira and squish it in with the tabular data, I publish it to the Sego database. So I'm going to hide our resources and site boundaries just because this is going to be recorded. So if you have any specifics pertaining to sites, let me know. So if we zoom in, we can see the blue, and that's the investigations. And if you click on an investigation, it will tell you a little bit of basic data. So there's your report number. It tells you the title, a little bit about it, when it was entered, if there's a buffer on it, because some of the buffer information tells us kind of how accurate the data is. If it doesn't have a buffer on it, that means it came directly from the consultant or agency as is. And if it says, yes, there's a buffer, that means it came to us as a point or a line and we had to buffer it. So it might not be as accurate. So maybe keep an eye out for that, especially when it comes to sites. If you click on the link here, it will take you to UDAM. So UDAM, I can't remember where we got that acronym, but it's pretty snazzy. So this is where we keep all of our scanned records. So as you can see, for 97 BS 93, there's a couple different reports for it. You can click on those and download your PDF. And that will download to your desktop if you so desire. If not, you can just flip through the scan pages and get all your information that you need out of there. It also does this with site numbers, but and with sites, there will be little red dots all over here showing where sites are. But since I'm not showing those for the presentation, you can't see those. And there's also going to be gray blobs, which are the holding tank sites, which are the Smiths that people have requested, but a site form has not yet come in and final data has not yet come in through the 106 process. So those are kind of like the spatial holding spots for data that has yet to come in. And so they will have a Smith number and it will tell you the report number associated with it. So if you need more information about those, you're welcome to contact me and I'll get in touch with whoever recorded them and get more information for you if you really need it. To do a little search, so we'll just do a quick search. So I found that let's see, do this little clipboard here with the plus to add data. And then you can add your search area. I found that even though it says shapefile, CSV, KML, or GeoJSON, the zipped shapefile works the best. So there's all my pictures are downloaded. So I have my Sego demo folder, and I just grabbed someone's buffer from a previous request, and it happens to be here in Utah County. So it zooms, the Sego application will add your buffer over here in the table of contents to the left, and we'll show you your buffer here. So if you want, I think you can change like transparency so you can see underneath it. It's pretty cool. You can fiddle around with some of these little buttons. To do a search, we do one sort of file type at a time. So I'll search the investigation since we're not showing resources or any site boundaries. So we'll pop this little search bar. So we want to show anything that intersects with our half-mile buffer. And you can also, if you don't have a buffer on your shapefile, you can apply one in here. Just type it in, 5 miles or whatever, and then just hit apply. So this will show me everything that intersects with this green blob. And you see that it zooms out because we've got a lot of linear sites that extend through most of Utah County. So I can zoom in and see what's been highlighted in here a lot more clearly. And if you would like a table of this, hit these 3 dots over here, new view in attribute table. And I always get rid of this filter by map extent, because when you filter by map extent, anything that is in your map is only going to show up in that table. So I get rid of that so it shows everything that is highlighted and intersects my project area. And so the one thing that we in records want to fix here is that there's no good way to export this data, unfortunately. So unless somebody's got like a really cool trick that I don't know about, I just do this little copy paste into Excel. Paste as text. And there you go. There's all your information associated with your search in terms of your report numbers. And to clear your selection, you can just go over here and hit clear, and it all goes away. Hopefully. Oop. I don't know why it's not clearing. We can uncheck it. There you go. And if you want to reset everything and do it all over again, you can just refresh your screen and it'll come back up, just starting from home. If you want to as well, you can also add your own data in here. You can search your organization. You can search a URL from a web service and add other information in here. And we've tried to put a lot of things in the table of contents that we figured that you might want, like surface land ownership. You can see who owns what. Also has the little table of contents over here, or the symbology to the side, so you can see who owns what. We also have, if you zoom in enough, the township range and sections, if you need those. You can even search up here for your investigations. So let's search 97 Q97 VS0093. And I'll take you to your investigation. You zoom in to see it a little better. Oh, I turned it off, didn't I? Oop. Cool. So there you have it. There's just a few easy navigational tricks around there. If you have any questions, always feel free to email archrecords@utah.gov, and I'll get to you answering your questions as quickly as possible. Now, when we're over here in UDAM, things are a little bit trickier. So we can type in a site number, Devereaux House. We'll type in a site number, and it comes up with like all these page. So if I'm just looking for a site form, I can click over here to archaeological site records. So this filters it out by the two different file types that we manage in here. So site records and reports records. So I want a site record, and there's still all these pages. So I can sort over here by the title A to Z, and it'll pop up with the top one. For some reason, some of the older scans separate out into individual pages when you search. So doing that sort by title A to Z really helps. You can also kind of look through here up in the search bar. You can type in a few different keywords that can help you, especially if it's an old report that's been OCR'd, and current ones should, just because they're PDFs and they're coming into us as PDFs, they're searchable. So that can help you too. If you're looking for something specifically, there's also these little years. You can narrow down your year and your timeline if you're doing a new search. You know, I just want sites recorded between 2008 and 2022. And you can update that as well. So that's it for the demonstration. As always, if you have questions, email archrecords@utah.gov. I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got.
Deb, would you mind explaining really quickly before we get to Amber's question, who is qualified to gain access to these databases, and how much does it cost?
Yeah, so anybody who holds a current PI permit in the state of Utah, and if you need information on how to obtain that, you can let me know. But I think we're all agencies here. And then anybody who works underneath you, if you're a PI holder, you can vouch for that person who works under your permit, and you can put like your permit number on the application. And folks that have data sharing agreement with us that falls under the Secretary of Interior standards. So anyway, that's who can have access.
And how much does it cost?
Oh yeah, thank you. So for 1 to 2 users, it's $200 a year, and it's annual. So we usually bill from like August to August. It was like July to July, but it kind of was overwhelming our end of state fiscal year accounting folks. So to make sure that like all of our payments stay within one fiscal year, I just do it from August to August. So $200 for 1 to 2 users, $300 for 3 users, $400 for 4 users, and $500 for 500 and up. And anytime anybody moves from consultant or agency to another place, they need to refill out the form and get a new user login and password from me, just so we can keep track of that. And, you know, SWCA doesn't want to pay for someone else's user, even if they've moved and they're only paying for a full year. So anyway, if you move, let me know, or if you are going to quit or go somewhere else, or if you've got new folks coming in, which happens a lot, let me know.
Thanks, Deb. We've
Yeah.
got 2 questions from Dana and Amber in the chat, if you want to answer.
When new sites are submitted as part of a report, are they automatically assigned Smiths, or does that? So when it depends on when you submit that. So you can request to ArcRecords your report number and your Smiths at the same time. I just need the shapefile for the Smithsonian numbers, or you can do it separately, whichever you prefer. It doesn't matter to me. I'll get it all done. Whatever's easier for your tracking. And then Amber, is there a difference between searching under home and recently digitized. Where was that? Was that in Sego or UDAM? I don't know where that was. Oh, UDAM. Thanks. I don't see a recently digitized option.
Can I unmute?
Yeah.
So when you go to UDAM and yours even showed it.
Oh,
right at the top, you see it says home, and then right next to it says recently digitized.
oh.
And when I do searches, the results seem to be different depending on what.
You know, thank you for showing me something new. I've never actually used that. It does look like this is all stuff that has come in the, I don't know how long.
I can't figure out how to do a comprehensive search, so it does both.
I usually just do home. It brings everything up.
Okay. It should include the recently digitized stuff too.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Savannah, you hit on the PI is the Plipco Archaeology Survey PI permit. So you can contact Chris Karambulis with Plipco. I'll put you in touch with him. Any of us can, if you're looking to get the PI permit. And
yeah, so for those agencies on here that maybe don't have a professional archaeologist, obviously you need that Plipco permit or meet the Secretary of Interior standards for archaeology to gain access to these databases. If you have an undertaking where you need to consult the databases, either hire an archaeological contractor which has access to those, or in some instances I am willing to look at what is there for you. But that's only to advise your identification efforts. It's not to count as identification efforts in any case, but we are willing to help in certain instances if you just really want to see, like, if there's an archaeological site in your small project area, you don't have access to Sego or UDAM, you don't want to hire a contractor, or maybe the effects of the undertaking, you don't have to hire a contractor. We are happy to provide that in some instances. So just, yeah, email me if you need that.
And kind of along that vein too, like, you know, some people still don't have access to GIS products. And so if you need assistance with that, just on a smaller scale, let me know. We're happy to help. There's quite often that there's still a couple of consultants that send me, you know, scanned maps, and I will, you know, digitize it and then send them the spatial stuff back along with their GIS queries that they paid for. So I'm always happy to help because I know not everybody has full access to all the technology, and I don't want that to be a prohibitor of doing work in the state of Utah.
And GIS products are very, very expensive as well for those who have smaller archaeological firms. Any other questions?
Everyone's gone to lunch.
Well, thank you, Savannah, and thank you, Deb, for walking through that. I think that's the first time we've kind of did that back-to-back sort of compliance, records, kind of submission, and the synergy. And I just wanted to underscore that I know probably a lot of these requirements might sound very draconian and very OCD, but you can see if we're receiving 4,000 to 5,000 new sites a year, 3,000 to 4,000 new historic building records a year, 1,500, 2,000 project reports a year, tightening up the data coming in just is really important, because all of you are overwhelmed and busy, and I respect that, but as it gets down to the finest level of tubes, there's only several people that deal with all the data incoming. So I appreciate every single buddy out there doing their best to review these reports, make sure it's meeting our standards. And I know sometimes it's frustrating, but all these standards exist for an honest to good reason, to make sure our data is moving through the system as quickly as possible. So I appreciate all of what you guys are doing doing the boots on the ground work, and help us help you.
And I appreciate, in that same vein, I appreciate you putting up with me. I can be hard sometimes, and I appreciate that. Like Chris said, it's for a reason. Obviously, it's not personal. I'm really just trying to protect you and your agency, to make sure that you guys are meeting the standards to be tight and to meet all the Section 106 requirements. So I appreciate you working with me, and I think for the most part, everybody's doing really great in their submissions. Like Chris said at the beginning, always room for improvement, tighten things up here and there. But we also really appreciate everybody taking nearly 3 hours out of their day today to be here. This will also be available on YouTube. We have a Utah SHPO YouTube, and so that's what this recording is going to head towards, YouTube. So it's a very publicly available link. That's why we made sure to hide the site location during Deb's tutorial. So we will send out that link to the YouTube as well as the slide decks in a couple of days, hopefully by the end of the week. And then, like I said, look out for our new guidance, and then our new SHPO cultural or short form and SHPO cover sheet, in addition to the cultural sensitivity training before the end of the year. And let us know if you have any questions about that. But the guidance is just to improve our process, improve the process you guys are doing, and it's to benefit everybody. So unless anybody has any last minute questions, comments, that would be awesome, Tessie. Yeah, I think that's a good resource that everybody should have access to. We haven't distributed it to a lot of folks, but I think now is the time, especially since we have it in Spanish as well. So without further ado, I think I will all say goodbye, go get some lunch, take a nap, do whatever you need to do. And we will follow up soon via email with the recording. So thank you, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate it, and the great questions.
Thanks, everybody. See, they're all still awake. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you guys over at RD.